Reality check time. Life isn't some fairy tale courtroom where good intentions get rewarded and hard work automatically leads to success. No, what we're living in is a brutal arena where the most cunning players win, not necessarily the most deserving ones. Right now, as you're watching this video, there are people with half your intelligence, a fraction of your work ethic, and zero moral compass who are achieving the exact results you've been desperately chasing for years. This isn't happening because they're luckier or because the universe has favorites. It's because they've cracked a code that most people refuse to acknowledge even exists. They understand something that your parents, teachers, and society deliberately kept hidden from you. The invisible game of psychological influence that determines who rises and who remains stuck in mediocrity forever. You've been programmed to follow rules that stopped being relevant decades ago. They conditioned you to wait patiently for recognition while others simply take what they want without asking permission. You've been trained to be predictable, transparent, and honest to a fault, while the real power players move in shadows, manipulating outcomes before you even realize the game has started. This system wasn't designed to be fair. It was specifically engineered to keep naive, good-hearted people exactly where they are right now, wondering why their best efforts go unnoticed while morally questionable individuals build empires around them. The uncomfortable truth is that this psychological battlefield has been studied and documented for centuries, but most people choose to remain willfully ignorant because accepting reality would shatter their comfortable delusions about how the world actually operates. 500 years ago, a brilliant Italian diplomat named Niccolò Machiavelli witnessed this exact same dynamic playing out in the royal courts and political arenas of Renaissance Europe. He watched honest, talented individuals get completely destroyed by ruthless manipulators who understood human psychology better than their victims understood themselves. Instead of turning away in disgust, Machiavelli decided to document these patterns, creating what would become the ultimate handbook for understanding human nature at its most raw and unfiltered level. Today, I'm going to expose the psychological principles that separate the predators from the prey in every single social interaction, business deal, and relationship you'll ever encounter. These aren't abstract philosophical concepts or feel-good motivational theories. These are battle-tested strategies that have been used by everyone from ancient Roman emperors to modern corporate executives to gain and maintain power over others. But before we dive deeper, I need you to understand something crucial about what you're about to learn. Once you see how human psychology really works beneath the surface, you can never go back to being naive. You'll start noticing manipulation attempts everywhere. You'll recognize when someone is using emotional triggers to control your behavior. You'll see through fake personalities and calculated charm campaigns. Most importantly, you'll never again be able to claim that you're just an innocent victim of circumstances beyond your control. This transformation happened to me personally, and it was both liberating and terrifying at the same time. For years, I was the classic good guy who did everything by the book. I showed up early, stayed late, exceeded expectations, and genuinely cared about doing the right thing in every situation. I believed that merit would speak for itself, that hard work would be recognized, and that treating people with respect would naturally result in being treated with respect in return. Instead, I watched mediocre colleagues get promoted over me repeatedly. I saw charismatic sociopaths build loyal followings while I remained invisible despite delivering superior results. I witnessed people with questionable ethics create massive opportunities for themselves, while I waited patiently for someone to notice my contributions and reward them accordingly. The breaking point came when I realized that intelligence without psychological awareness is actually a disadvantage in most real-world scenarios. The world doesn't reward the smartest person in the room. It rewards the person who best understands how to influence and control the emotions, perceptions, and decisions of everyone else in that room. Technical skills, moral character, and pure effort mean absolutely nothing if you can't make people value what you bring to the table. This revelation completely destroyed my naive worldview, but it also freed me from the limiting beliefs that had been sabotaging my potential for decades. I stopped expecting fairness and started creating favorable outcomes through strategic psychological positioning. I stopped trying to prove my worth through endless demonstrations and started making others compete for my attention and approval. Machiavelli observed this same pattern in the Italian city-states of his era. Political power rarely went to the most virtuous leaders or the most competent administrators. Instead, it consistently flowed to whoever best understood how to read human motivations, exploit psychological vulnerabilities, and position themselves as indispensable to the right people at the right moments. The princes and nobles who succeeded weren't necessarily the most intelligent or the most moral. They were the ones who recognized that governing people requires understanding what drives human behavior at its most fundamental level. They knew that people respond more strongly to emotional manipulation than logical arguments, that they crave strong leadership even when they claim to want freedom, and that they judge others based on perception rather than reality. These historical lessons aren't just academic curiosities, they're survival manuals for navigating modern corporate hierarchies, social dynamics, and personal relationships. The same psychological triggers that worked 5 centuries ago are still working today, because human nature hasn't evolved significantly during that relatively short time period. Learning to think like a strategic psychologist, rather than a naive idealist, isn't about becoming cruel or losing your humanity. It's about becoming sophisticated enough to recognize when others are playing psychological games with you, and developing the skills to either avoid those games entirely or win them decisively when avoidance isn't possible. Think of it as upgrading from checkers to chess. Most people are still playing by simple, predictable rules, while their opponents are thinking several moves ahead, considering multiple scenarios and positioning pieces for long-term strategic advantage. The difference in outcomes isn't about intelligence or effort, it's about understanding which game is actually being played. Before we continue exploring these psychological weapons, I want you to make a commitment in the comment section below. Write these exact words: "I refuse to be manipulated." This isn't just a meaningless phrase. It's the first step toward developing what I call psychological sovereignty, the ability to maintain control over your own mental and emotional state, regardless of what others try to do to influence you. This commitment represents a fundamental shift in mindset from being a passive victim of other people's psychological strategies to becoming an active participant who recognizes manipulation attempts and responds strategically rather than reactively. It's the difference between being pushed around by stronger personalities and holding your own ground, regardless of who you're dealing with. The journey from psychological victim to psychological predator begins with abandoning the most dangerous lie that's been programmed into your thinking since childhood. The belief that fairness exists as anything more than a useful fiction designed to keep naive people in line. Justice, equality, and reciprocity are beautiful concepts that work wonderfully in philosophical discussions and children's stories, but they have almost no correlation with how power actually operates in the real world. While you're waiting for equal treatment, someone more aggressive is already taking what should have been yours. While you're expecting reciprocity from people who only understand self-interest, they're exploiting your predictable responses to advance their own agendas. While you're playing by rules that nobody else follows, you're making yourself an easy target for psychological predators who view your moral constraints as exploitable weaknesses. Look honestly at your own life experiences. How many times have you shown respect to someone who never returned that respect? How many times have you helped people who disappeared completely when you needed assistance? How many times have you waited your turn while others cut in line without any consequences? How many times have you given someone the benefit of the doubt only to have that generosity used against you later? These weren't isolated incidents or bad luck. They were the predictable results of psychological programming that taught you to lose consistently while making you feel virtuous about it. You were trained to be prey, and predators can smell that training from across the room. Machiavelli understood this dynamic perfectly when he wrote that men must either be pampered or crushed because they can take revenge for light injuries, but not for fatal ones. The harm done to a man must be such that there is no fear of revenge. He wasn't advocating physical violence. He was describing the psychology of dominance and submission in any competitive situation. When you challenge someone's position weakly or halfway, you create an enemy who remembers the insult but isn't intimidated enough to avoid retaliation. You end up in the worst possible position, appearing weak while simultaneously making yourself a target for future attacks. This is why most people's attempts at setting boundaries fail so spectacularly. They make timid requests instead of firm demands, and they back down at the first sign of resistance. True psychological dominance works completely differently. When someone crosses your boundaries, you don't waste time explaining why their behavior is inappropriate or trying to convince them to treat you better. Instead, you demonstrate through decisive action that disrespecting you carries real costs in terms of social status, access to resources, or emotional comfort. You don't beg to be treated properly. You create situations where treating you properly becomes the only rational choice for people who want to maintain any kind of relationship or professional connection with you. This might sound harsh, but it's actually far more efficient and less cruel than the endless cycle of resentment and passive aggression that most people trap themselves in. The biggest misconception about becoming psychologically ruthless is that it requires losing emotional control or acting impulsively out of anger. Actually, the opposite is true. Real psychological power comes from maintaining perfect emotional discipline while others around you become reactive and predictable. Every time someone manages to trigger an emotional response from you, they've gained valuable information about how to manipulate your future behavior. Anger, frustration, disappointment, and defensive reactions are all forms of data that sophisticated operators will use to push your buttons more effectively in subsequent interactions. Think about the most powerful people you've encountered in your life. Do they frequently lose their temper? Do they engage in shouting matches or emotional arguments? Do they get visibly upset when things don't go their way? Of course not. They remain calm, calculated, and strategically focused, regardless of what chaos is happening around them. This emotional sovereignty becomes a weapon because it's so rare and intimidating to people who are used to controlling others through emotional manipulation. When someone realizes they can't make you react emotionally, they often become frustrated and start making mistakes that you can exploit to your advantage. Consider this scenario. Someone tries to humiliate you in front of other people, expecting you to become defensive and flustered. If you react predictably by arguing or trying to justify yourself, you've reinforced their dominant position and made yourself look weak to everyone watching. But if you remain completely calm and respond with something that exposes their insecurity or makes them look foolish, you've reversed the power dynamic entirely. The key is that your response must be chosen strategically rather than triggered automatically. You feel the emotional impulse, acknowledge it as information about the situation, but then you consciously select the reaction that will best serve your long-term interests rather than just releasing tension in the moment. Machiavelli expressed this principle by saying that injuries should be inflicted all at once so that they may give less offense. In other words, when you need to establish dominance or correct someone's behavior, do it decisively and completely rather than dragging out the process with repeated small conflicts. Don't make empty threats that you won't follow through on. Don't give multiple warnings that teach people they can ignore your boundaries without consequences. Don't engage in prolonged emotional battles that drain your energy and make you appear unstable to observers. Instead, wait for the right moment, gather your resources, and then respond with such clarity and force that everyone involved understands exactly where you stand and what happens to people who try to test your limits. This approach actually requires far less ongoing conflict than the alternative of constantly fighting small battles that never resolve anything. Here's a truth that will fundamentally change how you approach all social interactions. Being liked is a weakness, but being respected is power. When people merely like you, they see you as safe, predictable, and non-threatening. They know they can take advantage of your good nature because you'll prioritize maintaining harmony over protecting your own interests. But when people respect you, they recognize that you're potentially dangerous if provoked. They understand that you have standards, boundaries, and the willingness to enforce both, regardless of how others might react. This doesn't mean you have to be unpleasant or antisocial. It means you've trained people to associate crossing you with negative consequences for themselves. Ask yourself this question about your current social circle. When important decisions need to be made, who gets consulted? Is it the nicest person in the group, or is it the person who commands the most respect? When conflicts arise, whose opinion carries the most weight? The answer reveals everything you need to know about the difference between being liked and being respected. Machiavelli was explicit about this principle when he wrote that it is much safer to be feared than loved if you have to choose one or the other. This doesn't mean ruling through terror or cruelty. It means developing a reputation as someone who is fair but absolutely non-negotiable when your core principles are challenged. In practical terms, this means learning to say no without feeling guilty or needing to provide extensive justifications. It means setting clear expectations about how you expect to be treated and following through with real consequences when those expectations aren't met. It means making decisions based on what serves your long-term interests rather than what will make you temporarily popular. The transition from people-pleaser to dominant personality requires abandoning the question, "Will they like me if I do this?" and replacing it with, "Will this increase or decrease my influence and respect?" This shift in thinking changes everything about how you show up in the world and how others respond to your presence. One of the most common mistakes that destroys any chance of developing real influence is talking too much while accomplishing too little. Most people fall into this trap constantly. They make grand announcements about changes they're going to make, threaten consequences they never deliver, and promise transformation that never materializes. The result is that they become completely predictable and easy to dismiss. They develop a reputation as someone who barks but never bites, someone whose words carry no weight because everyone knows there's no meaningful action behind them. Strategic psychologists operate from the opposite approach. They prefer silence and observation until the moment comes for decisive action. When they do act, it's with such precision and impact that the message becomes impossible to ignore or forget. Machiavelli warned that if you must injure someone, make sure the injury is so severe that you don't have to worry about revenge. Applied to psychological warfare, this means that when you need to establish dominance or correct someone's behavior, you should do it so completely and memorably that they never consider challenging you again. This doesn't require cruelty or excessive aggression. It requires strategic thinking about timing, context, and maximum impact with minimum ongoing effort. One well-executed demonstration of your standards and boundaries is worth more than 1,000 empty threats or complaints. For example, Imagine someone consistently interrupts you during meetings or makes dismissive comments about your ideas in front of colleagues. The weak response is to complain privately, ask them to stop, or vent to other people about their behavior. This accomplishes nothing except making you look powerless and giving them confirmation that their strategy is working. The dominant response is to wait for the perfect opportunity and then expose their behavior in a way that makes them look foolish or unprofessional in front of the same audience they've been trying to impress. This creates immediate social consequences that are far more powerful than any private conversation could ever be. The psychological impact extends far beyond just that one person. Everyone else in the room receives the message that disrespecting you comes with real costs, and they adjust their behavior accordingly without you ever having to address them individually. This principle applies to every area of life where respect and influence matter. Don't try to prove your value through constant demonstrations or availability. Instead, occasionally withdraw your presence or resources so people can experience what they lose when you're not there. Don't engage in endless debates about your worth or position. Take actions that make your value undeniable and your boundaries crystal clear. Don't threaten consequences unless you're fully prepared to follow through immediately and completely. The mathematics of power is straightforward. Fewer warnings, more decisive action, less talking, more strategic cutting of access, less attempting to please everyone, more demonstrating that your respect must be earned rather than assumed. Build a reputation as someone who doesn't need to announce their intentions, because when they act, the results speak louder than any words could. This is how you transform from someone who gets overlooked and taken advantage of into someone whose presence changes the entire dynamic of any room you enter. Now, let's discuss the most sophisticated weapon in the psychological arsenal, and it has nothing to do with raw intelligence or physical intimidation. I'm talking about the power of perception management. What other people believe about you matters infinitely more than who you actually are underneath the surface. Most people live under the dangerous illusion that being a good person with admirable qualities will naturally result in recognition and respect from others. This is complete nonsense. Human beings don't have the time, interest, or ability to investigate your inner character. They make snap judgments based on surface-level signals, social proof, and immediate impressions. If you don't actively shape how you're perceived, other people will create their own version of who you are, and it's virtually guaranteed to work against your interests rather than for them. Machiavelli understood this when he observed that the majority of people judge by appearances rather than reality, because everyone can see, but few can truly understand. Your reputation is your most valuable currency in any social or professional context. It determines who wants to work with you, who trusts you with important opportunities, and how much influence your words carry when you speak. Yet most people treat reputation management as an afterthought or consider it somehow dishonest to consciously craft their image. This is strategic suicide in a world where everyone else is carefully curating how they appear to others through social media, professional networking, and calculated social interactions. The people who succeed aren't necessarily the most qualified or deserving. They're the ones who best understand how to position themselves in other people's minds as valuable, reliable, and worth investing in. Perception management doesn't require being fake or misrepresenting your actual abilities. It means strategically highlighting your authentic strengths while minimizing exposure of your weaknesses or vulnerabilities. It means associating yourself with high-status people and environments, so their value transfers to you through proximity and association. Consider how this works in practice. Two people achieve identical professional accomplishments. One person documents their success, shares it strategically, and makes sure the right people know about their achievement. The other person stays quiet, assuming their work will speak for itself and that recognition will come naturally. Who gets more opportunities, respect, and advancement. The person who controlled their narrative and made their value visible to others. This isn't about bragging or being obnoxious. It's about understanding that visibility is a skill that must be developed just like any other professional competency. Your posture, voice tone, clothing choices, and even the strategic use of silence communicate more about your status and competence than hours of verbal explanation ever could. Walk into a room with confident body language and direct eye contact, and people immediately categorize you as someone important before you've said a single word. The psychological principle at work is simple but powerful. People treat you exactly the way you've trained them to treat you through your consistent patterns of behavior and self-presentation. If you consistently present yourself as someone whose time and attention are valuable, others will naturally assume that's true and behave accordingly. This means making conscious choices about which stories you allow to circulate about you, which social circles you invest your time in, and how much of your personal life you reveal to others. Strategic mystery is often more powerful than complete transparency because people tend to fill in unknown information with assumptions that favor whoever they're trying to understand. Above all, it means projecting confidence even when you feel uncertain, because confidence is magnetic while insecurity repels people at a subconscious level. Your reputation is more important than money, more valuable than any skill set, and more protective than any other asset you could develop. Treat reputation building as a strategic priority rather than something that happens accidentally. Protect your image as fiercely as you would protect any other investment. Use your reputation as a psychological weapon that opens doors before you even knock on them. In psychological warfare, the story that gets told about events matters more than the actual facts of what happened. The same action can be interpreted as strong leadership or arrogant bullying, confident decision-making or reckless impulsiveness, depending entirely on who controls the narrative and how they frame the situation for others. Most people never learn this lesson, so they allow others to define them through gossip, assumptions, and deliberate character assassination. They react to events without considering how their reactions will be perceived or weaponized against them later. Strategic operators think differently. They understand that every interaction is an opportunity to reinforce their desired image or accidentally undermine it. They consider not just what they want to accomplish in the moment, but how their choices will be interpreted and discussed by others afterward. This means learning to frame your decisions before others can misinterpret them. If you make a difficult choice, immediately establish the principled reasoning behind it, rather than letting people assume you acted out of selfishness or spite. If someone attacks you personally or professionally, reframe their attack as evidence of their own weakness, insecurity, or jealousy, rather than defending yourself desperately. The secret is becoming the author of your own story, rather than allowing others to write chapters about you without your input or approval. Don't let your life be narrated by people who don't understand your motivations or who have reasons to portray you negatively. This brings us to the final lesson that separates psychological predators from their prey. Real power never announces itself loudly or obviously. The most dangerous people in any social hierarchy aren't the ones who constantly talk about their strength or threaten others with consequences. They're the ones who operate quietly, calculate moves while others are emotional, and position themselves strategically while their competitors are focused on short-term victories. Authentic influence is felt rather than proclaimed. It changes the energy in a room when you enter. It makes people choose their words more carefully when addressing you. It creates a subtle but unmistakable awareness that you're someone who should be taken seriously, regardless of what you happen to say or do in any particular moment. Build your psychological influence through consistent demonstration rather than constant announcement. Let your results speak louder than your promises. Let your presence command respect before you open your mouth. Let your strategic positioning create opportunities that others have to beg for. Remember this fundamental truth about the psychological battlefield we all navigate every single day. There is no neutral ground in human interactions. You're either developing influence or becoming influenced by others. You're either learning to recognize and counter manipulation or becoming an easier target for people who already understand these principles. The choice is entirely yours, but you can't avoid making it. You can continue believing in comfortable illusions about fairness and good intentions, or you can wake up to the psychological warfare that determines who rises and who remains stuck in mediocrity. You can keep playing by rules that nobody else follows, or you can learn the actual game being played around you every single day. You can remain predictable and exploitable, or you can become strategically unpredictable and psychologically dangerous to anyone who tries to manipulate you. The decision you make right now will determine whether you spend the rest of your life wondering why others get opportunities that should have been yours, or whether you become someone who creates opportunities through superior understanding of human psychology and strategic thinking. Become ruthless in the most sophisticated sense of the word. Not cruel, not heartless, but absolutely unwilling to be manipulated, exploited, or overlooked by people who mistake your previous kindness for permanent weakness. The psychological war for respect, influence, and control is happening whether you choose to participate consciously or not. The only question is whether you'll fight back or continue being defeated by people who understand the rules better than you do. Make your choice, develop your skills, and never again allow yourself to be anyone's psychological victim. The arena is waiting, and the most strategic mind wins every single time.